Hi, this is Robert from ITQ. I'm here with Kelsey Hightower. Nice to see you again. We spoke last year at VMware Explore, or was it the year before? I can't remember. But KubeCon this time, a bit more your stomping ground, I think.
Yeah, VMware's my crowd too. I've worked in enterprise IT half my career. So a lot of tech companies, but yes, I worked in VMware environments. I spun up a VMware environment when I was running Puppet Labs operations team. And so I'm very familiar with that audience as well.
So my background's in infrastructure and done VMware for 12 years. Last 4 years, just cloud native. And it's such a different world to get into. And when you walk around KubeCon, you realize that a lot of people, they're doing cloud native, they're doing Kubernetes in public cloud. A lot of the people here actually have very little or maybe no experience at all with the kind of the on-premise data centers. But a few years ago, if you spoke to people about doing Kubernetes on bare metal in the enterprise space, they were like, why? Why would you? People are moving to public cloud. There's a momentum there. That seems to have changed the last few years. People talk about repatriation now, and the market is kind of, I've never seen such an upheaval in the last few years. There's consolidation going on, people buying other companies, and people are talking about the on-prem and the enterprise data center again. It might be for cloud costs, it might be for other reasons. Walking around here, I'm seeing projects relating to bare metal, relating to managing bare metal at scale, and then there's AI. I mean, is this a trend that you were expecting, like just a few years ago?
No one ever stopped talking about on-prem. It just became something not worth talking about because it got so stable, right? Most companies rack servers, install VMware, open up the API, and then your company culture takes over. 10 years ago, you could have automated a lot of this stuff using VMware. My first tutorial of Kubernetes was on VMware, not the cloud. And that was 10 years ago when I was at CoreOS. It's the company culture's usage of on-prem. Think about it. We buy only the necessary things. We are not going to spend an extra $1 billion doing research to make on-prem better. Order your thing from Dell, order VMware, install Jira, install Oracle, and I am done, and I will wait for issues. The cloud is a very different momentum, right? Find the very best technology money can buy, and if you can't buy it, you invent it. That is not the mindset of on-prem. 10 years later, the things that were invented are now for sale. And now you can go to your same vendor. You can go to Cisco that has now bought Isovalent and get the cutting edge networking from the existing vendor. Same thing with VMware, right? They buy Heptio and now it's integrated. Kubernetes is now inside of it. So in this case, all you have to do is upgrade to the latest version of VMware, and you now have Kubernetes. And so I think we just went through this phase of everything is changing. We go from Nagios to Prometheus, and you're looking at this like, I'm not quite sure if I'm ready. But then eventually your vendor brings it to you, right? You didn't say, I want SAP HANA to support Prometheus, but the newest version probably supports it. So it's just there. So I think what happened was, a lot of things came. I never thought all the things would change at the same time. I didn't think because of Docker, we would rethink all of networking. We would rethink storage. We would rethink load balancers. And so I think everyone took that last 10 years to say, maybe we should think about a common open telemetry instead of just Splunk. And so I think once all those things got recreated, and the incumbent said, you know what? Maybe it makes sense for something like Splunk to support open telemetry. Is that so bad? So now we have common protocols, not just for HTTP, for logging, metrics, and compute. And of course, it finds its way back into an environment that needs it to be mature before it really makes sense to adopt. And the last thing I'll say here is that you bought hardware before. If I buy hardware today, we are not buying more hardware until maybe 3 to 5 years from now, unless it's GPUs and it's going to enable more performance.
Yeah. So when these cloud native technologies make their way back into the enterprise, it's often through vendors. Though up till this point, if you were doing Kubernetes on premises, you're building out platforms in the on-prem enterprise space, it's often do it yourself. You see people grabbing the stuff they need, the bits and pieces, and building out what we now call platform engineering. To my mind, I wonder how scalable that is when it comes to skill sets, when it comes to the attitude. It's a very different, like you said, it's a very different mindset in cloud native to build these things out, and the assumption is that the infrastructure part is usually already satisfied in public cloud. In the on-premises world, I see a disconnect maybe between the old way of thinking around infrastructure and the established parts of organizations that deal with that world and must continue to deal with that world. And now there's new stuff coming in over the top of it. There's a culture gap there. I wonder if you see the same thing.
I think what you're highlighting is the fact that, and I'm not being mean, you did not have to elevate your skill set on-prem. What most people learn in 1 year, they still only know 20 years from now. That's a problem. But you can get away with it on-prem. I buy the server, I stack it, the rack is still 42 inches, 19 inches, same Ethernet cable, I'm learning nothing. I just come in and do my job. And so when I show you something new, and you're not used to learning anything, you had Pixie Boot 20 years ago. You can Pixie Boot. DHCP is old. DNS is old. What is console used for service discovery? DNS.
Yes.
It's not like we invented a brand new protocol that no one's seen before. So these are all old ideas, repackaged, reworked. And when we say cloud native, we're talking about an idea that it will be automated by default. It will have an API by default. I think the mindset on-prem was, if there's no API, I will just do it by hand. And I'm not managing that many servers, so who cares? So I think when you bring this new technology and the same people realize that they already know 80% of this new stuff. You want to run Kubernetes? It runs on top of Linux. The Linux you already have. The apps that will run in Kubernetes are the same apps you already have. Now you can get value from Kubernetes because this is your chance. You can now automate things using the Kubernetes API instead of bash scripts. So I don't think the gap is that big. The real opportunity here is, just because I was doing it this way for so long on-prem, doesn't mean I'm incapable of learning a new way. But it's usually the same technologies. Envoy, Service Mesh, HTTP, X509 certificates. That's the gap. The gap is just confidence.
Yeah. Now, Kubernetes excites me so much because we've never had a technology that could be so widely adopted, that's not backed by one particular vendor, that is so useful for so many different things. Right? It creates a single abstraction that I can do more or less anything with. You famously said it's a platform to build platforms. Taking that to the enterprise space, you see people now going back to that same bare metal idea. If we take Kubernetes as the lowest level of abstraction on top of the hardware, we can do everything on top of that. It enables a far better foundation for automation. But, I mean, do we even still need VMs? I mean, we still have legacy.
Kubernetes only runs on VMs or bare metal. Only. If you remove those two, Kubernetes is useless. It does nothing. All it is a workflow on top of compute. Kubernetes didn't change compute. Docker did not change compute. It's the same kernel, same networking, same exact storage. There is nothing new introduced. All Kubernetes does is says, here's a workflow to use VMs or bare metal. Nothing changed. And I think most people have a mental block. When they say cloud native, they think, oh, cloud. It's like, in the cloud, we install Kubernetes on virtual machines since day one. So there's really, if you stop saying cloud native, it gets easier to understand. So you have machines, how many? 10? Great. You can manage them with a for loop, or you can install Kubernetes on them, and you can manage the same 10 VMs using the Kubernetes API.
So I guess the message for a lot of people in that on-premise world who think that their skill sets are no longer relevant is, to your point, the foundation of how we automate and build up these stacks might be different, but all those technologies come back. We see this with our customers. Networking comes back. I want to do Cilium with BGP. I need to know how BGP works. If I want to do, advanced storage replication between clusters, I need to understand how blocks work. I need to understand, how locking works. The skill sets fundamentally don't change. I mean, they're wrapped up in maybe some other layers. Would you though agree that the stack has become more complicated? I worry about this too. Are there enough people that are able to understand enough of the stack in order to support these environments in this on-premise world?
I mean, system calls are complicated. So we use runtimes that take syntax and compile it to something the machine understands. And for the last 20 years, there's been more instruction sets added to the Intel architecture, to the ARM architecture. But you can still write Java or Golang, all the same. And so who understands how to build compiler? A very small population of the world, but we have more developers than ever. And so do you really need to know the Intel x86 instruction set? No. But can you use it faster than ever? Yes. So the whole point of Kubernetes is just a checkpoint. 15 years ago, people working in cloud-like environments understood the value of a scheduler. Where do I put this application? If you were a human, what would you do? You have a spreadsheet, you put the 10 servers on the spreadsheet, and you say, hey, this one has less apps than that one. So you put it on that one. Easy. You understand it because you already do it. If you use Ansible, you have an inventory file. You have the VMs, and you assign them roles. Easy. Kubernetes takes the same concept and automates it. Nothing different. So I think for people that we're talking to right now, 80% of this already. You're probably already doing 60% of it. All you have to look at this and says, what does Kubernetes add to the table? So the thing I try to do with people, I say, hey, draw a dot. This is where your current infrastructure is. If you list down all the things you can currently do, I can deploy apps. I can load balance them. I can secure them. Great. I can log them and capture them in a central place. Great. So then you ask yourself, what am I missing? If nothing, then ignore Kubernetes. You don't need it. Leave it alone, ignore it. But if you say, hey, I wish I had an easier way to do the service discovery, and put that as your second dot. And then the question becomes, should you build it from scratch? Should you just install console on your VMs and be done with it? And maybe console is the right next step. Just bring console, install it on all the VMs, and now you have service discovery. But then when that list starts to get too long, and you look at Kubernetes, and Kubernetes starts offering a lot of the things on that list, then Kubernetes starts to make a lot of sense. But I would argue that you have to make this decision by knowing where you are, what you can currently do, and what you can't do. And if Kubernetes checks those boxes, install it. And maybe 20 years from now, just like with Linux, people do not need everything Linux can do. But they install it by default anyway, because it covers enough of the use cases. Why would you start from scratch?
Exactly, yeah. Well, Kelsey, it's been great talking with you again. Thank you so much for your time. And from KubeCon, this is Robert, Kelsey, and we'll see you next time.